From space year 1982 for the almighty VECTREX Arcade System, it's Berzerk.
Excellent. Fuck you, robots.
Berzerk, originally a 1980 arcade game from Stern Electronics and later ported to the Atari 2600 and 5200 systems. You control a little bonhomme and your main goal is to survive as long as possible, but mainly you appear in a maze-like area and you have to make it to one of the openings on the side of the walls while killing all the robots or avoiding them. Dawdle too long and this thing called Evil Otto will appear and pursue you until you either leave the screen or die. So, Berzerk. There's a fair chance you've probably played this game in some fashion over the years, especially if you're old as fuck. Aside from the arcade original, as mentioned, there was also the Atari 2600 version, which seems to be the most common home version that I've seen pop up every so often. But there is also a 5200 version, which apparently features the voice synthesis feature similar to the arcade version. Berzerk on the VECTREX doesn't have the voices. It also does not have color, which normally wouldn't be a big deal. But Berzerk uses colored robots to determine their overall difficulty and aggressiveness, how quickly they move, how often they fire. Without that indicator, you'll just have to be more prudent, but the overall challenge is not quite as severe, though make no mistake, it's still fairly challenging, especially if certain bugs allow for unwanted actions, like robots phasing through the walls. They're normally not supposed to do that, they're just supposed to die. In any event, aside from the lack of color, some lower difficulty, some severe slowdown at times, and the occasional glitch that might pop up, the VECTREX port has the classic Berzerk gameplay pretty much nailed, even if it is somewhat slower in some regards. You use the stick to move your little bonhomme around the screen, firing in any 8 directions, and generally speaking, the controls are fine. It's a good playing version of Berzerk, but because of programming glitches that'll pop up once you reach higher scores, it's not what I would call a functional version of Berzerk. Nothing you really have to worry about if you just suck at the game, but regardless, it's worth mentioning. Somebody came along later on and released a fixed version called Berzerk Debugged, and so if you're going to play any version of Berzerk on the VECTREX, the debugged version would be the one to go for, but I digress. Back to the retail Berzerk, since that's what we're playing here. Berzerk didn't use vector graphics, it was your typical raster arcade fare. But the VECTREX version does a fine enough job of converting the visual elements of the arcade game to the vector format. Again, Berzerk originally used color for its robots to indicate difficulty, and the VECTREX app obviously lacks color. Doesn't take away from the game visually, and the overlay does kind of fake it. Still, in terms of the overall presentation, it looks fine. There's not much to say about the audio aspect either. There's no voiceover to complement your adventure like there was in the arcades, and the sound effects are mostly serviceable. Overall, Berzerk is a fine game, and the VECTREX version is a more than serviceable conversion of the game that is hampered by bugs that you'll experience later down the road. The retail version is something you can play if you don't expect to be good at Berzerk, but for those wanting to reach higher scores without issue, you may as well track down the debugged version. Don't know about an individual release, but it's actually on the VECTREX multi-cart from Sean Kelly, so that's a good place to start. Anyway you look at it, Berzerk's a great game, a classic. Well worth playing in any format, really.